Good evening and welcome to yet another installation of our Election 2020 series here. I am Cindy Lott. I am full-time faculty, associate professor of practice, and the academic director for the nonprofit management program at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. We are so happy that you have joined us once again. And for those of you that are new to this series, we have all of them recorded from the past months. It's been now a year, and they're all on our website. So we invite you to look at all of that. So we know that there is a lot going on out there in commentary around the election. I will just mention that this series, when I first was thinking about it, it's been almost 2 years ago now. We could not have known just how extraordinary this cycle was going to be. But we do know this. Part of the purpose of this series within the academic curriculum, and also for working with practitioners and people out in the field, which is what we specialize in our program, taking the academic research to the field and vice versa, we know that all election cycles are important. Certainly federal election cycles are extraordinarily important, but so are the state cycles that come around and that also impact our nonprofit sector. So policy and advocacy is absolutely part and parcel of what we need to be doing in the sector. And it's not always been something that we've taught well. And it's something that's been a goal of this program and our curriculum. And I'm thrilled that we have a class in policy and advocacy. And one of our professors in that class is Sue Santa, who is one of the co-developers of this series, along with Sandra Swirsky. I want to thank them because they've been working with the program and with me for well over a year on this entire series. This series is actually not only the Election 2020 series, but is also part of our series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think this election cycle, if we've not thought it before, we certainly know it now, just how important and paramount these issues are in terms of actually setting an agenda, policy agenda. And tonight is that moment where we get a chance to look back and think about how this cycle has impacted the nonprofit sector, and also how our nonprofit policy and advocacy impacted this cycle. We will have a chance to also look forward to the next administration and also the state level administration, et cetera, at our last one of these election events, which will be February 11th in 2021, shortly after inauguration. So very important issues, and I could not be more thrilled that we have such incredible expertise that has been donated to this series over time. And tonight, all the more so, as we hear from a lot of different voices and a lot of different perspectives on what this cycle has meant to our sector and what we have done to impact the policy and advocacy that's come through in this election cycle on lots of different fronts. So with that, I want to thank everybody again for attending. I look forward to your questions tonight, and I'm going to hand this over to Sue and Sandra and our discussion panel. Please do ask questions, audience. We love to hear from you throughout the evening, and I hope to see you again in February.
Thank you, and good evening. So this series, the brainchild of Cindy Lott, is intended to underscore that policy work is paramount in the nonprofit sector. That election cycles present enormous opportunities for advocacy and action. Each of the 6 workshops in this election series was designed to be in real time at important junctures of the 2020 election cycle, led by experts in nonprofit policy and advocacy. Tonight, we present the 5th workshop with 4 terrific panelists, and we'll focus on what just happened. You have each of the panelists' bios, so instead of recapping them, I'm going to ask each to briefly introduce themselves and say a few words about their organization's mission, so you have a sense of where they're coming from. We're going to go in alphabetical order. So Catherine, would you mind starting? And then we'll go to Brian, and then Patrice, and then Sonia.
Great, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm Catherine Bean. I'm the Vice President for Public Policy and Advocacy at YWCA USA. YWCA is actually a network of more than 200 local YWCAs across 46 states and the District of Columbia. We are, at our heart, our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, dignity, and freedom for all. And we do that in a variety of ways. ways. I lead up our advocacy efforts, including our Get Out the Vote work, but we also are a network of service providers at the local level. So we're the largest network of domestic and sexual violence service providers. Many of our YWCAs provide childcare services in their community, as well as housing and racial justice programs. But each of them is part of this federated model that really has developed over time, over 160 years of time in this nation, to respond to community needs. And so that's who our network is and our mission.
Thank you. Brian?
Sure.
Thank you. My name is Brian Miller, and I'm the director of Nonprofit Vote. We're a national organization, and our basic mission is to help nonprofits engage the communities they serve in voting in elections. So we work with a wide range of groups, including YWCA, United Way, Feeding America, and many, many others to help them build out their voter engagement muscle, if you will. And I think the one thing that I would add is a deep understanding of what I would call the theory of change in very brief form, is that a lot of people assume that it is the job of political parties and candidates to get people to the polls, to engage people. But the fundamental problem with that is the job of candidates is to win elections, which is understandable. That's their job. And so they're going to make very strategic decisions and only contact people with a history of voting. And what that does is people who don't have a history of voting end up not getting contacted. Because they don't get contacted, they don't vote. Because they don't vote, they get labeled as an unlikely voter, and this feedback loop keeps reinforcing itself. That's why we believe it's so important for nonprofits who have a fundamentally different mission. Nonprofits are generally interested in equity. They value equity, they value inclusiveness, and making sure the communities they serve are heard. And that fundamentally different goal drives a different outcome. And that's how we promote a more inclusive electorate. And so that's fundamentally the underlying theory that really drives our work to help nonprofits engage their communities.
Very well said. Thank you. Patrice?
Hi, my name is Patrice Onwuka. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum and our C4 sister organization, Independent Women's Voice. As everyone knows, women make up 50% of the population, about 50%, maybe more of the voting electorate. And so it's so important that we're able to reach out to women on a variety of different issues, which is what we do. We believe that we are fighting on behalf of women and their loved ones by helping them to expand opportunities. Promoting those policies that unleash freedom and individual liberty. We believe in a free market system. We believe in free market capitalism. And we believe that that's the best way to increase prosperity for an individual to achieve her American dream, and for people to achieve what they really set out in their hearts to do. So I look forward to sharing more about what we did in the 2020 election cycle, but it's really interesting how you can partner your C3 with your C4 organization in both educating, but then also changing and advocating for real policies that you believe are best for the country and for the individuals and constituents you serve.
Thank you very much. It'll be interesting to hear how the C3, C4 is balanced and activated for different purposes. So thank you. Last but not least, Sonia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sonia Melendez. I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Engagement for Hispanics in Philanthropy. We are a transnational network of foundations, donors, and nonprofits making impactful investments in the Latino community and developing our leaders so that they can effectively address pressing issues impacting Latino communities in the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. So this evening's format is centered around questions and answers. We're going to start with 3 questions that one or all can respond to. We'll have some good discussions and then go to audience questions. So audience, to ask a question, please type your question into the question function and we'll take it from there. So panelists, each of you is with an organization that seeks to influence policy, directly or indirectly, to advance the mission. Perhaps the most basic strategy is to encourage people to get to the polls, armed with information about your policy interests, and hope they vote the right way. Can you talk about your organization's voter engagement strategy, what you think worked and what didn't in this election cycle? And we're going to start the Q&A with Brian.
Thank you. I think, one of the things that we recognize, and I think you're absolutely right as far as helping people get to the polls, is a critical point of advocacy work. And a lot of because we work with a variety of nonprofits, we work with hunger groups, we work with health groups, we work with housing groups, they all work on different issues. But the fundamental crux of this is that to get people to the polls, to get people engaged in the process, there's this one of the most important things about getting people to the polls is trusted messengers, someone not someone anonymous. And that's why we really work with existing nonprofits to integrate voter engagement into their community programs. So a housing clinic integrates voter engagement in part of it. In fact, when you sign up someone from new housing, every time you move, you have to re-register. So you should update your registration anyway. Hunger clinics, hunger groups, building in voter engagement into their hunger programs. One of the advantages is it's not an anonymous person knocking on your door. It's the place where you drop off your kids for after school programs. It's the place where you go for English language class if you're a new citizen, right? And so by working through these trusted messengers, we can really effectively move the needle of getting communities that have previously, in many cases, felt marginalized and like their opinion doesn't matter, and bring them into the political process. And yes, it ties into the mission of those respective nonprofits, which is why we encourage folks to build some voter, in addition to voter registration and get out to vote, to build in some elements of voter education to help folks understand the connection between the policy issues that the organization advocates for and both the candidates and the ballot measures that might be on, up on the polls. And I think the two other things that I would say is in a presidential election year like this, I mean, this is probably splitting hairs, but voter registration is one of the best forms of get out to vote you can do. Because one of the biggest barriers to people participating in election is that they miss the registration deadline, right? When you're in a high saturation presidential election like this, there's so much media coming at you, it's hard to not know there's an election happening. But if you miss the deadline, it doesn't matter, you can't vote. If you've not updated your registration, if you're outdated, if you're registered in another state. So these are all important parts of that program work. And I think, so by working through these existing nonprofits, we can help them connect their issues and the issues that they're passionate about with the trust that they have with the communities that they serve, with the long-term relationships they have with the communities that they serve. And, with that infrastructure, they're on the ground, they can do that. And that's why, a big part of the work that we do is we provide webinars, trainings, resources to nonprofit leaders around the country to integrate this. We partner with a lot of groups to build out joint toolkits and joint campaigns. And we also have a program where we actually work directly with nonprofits across 7 states to run on the ground voter registration and get out to vote efforts at their respective nonprofits.
Thank you. You talk a lot about being a trusted messenger to voters, and that also extends for sure to members of Congress. Once they get elected, there's so many issues that they have to contend with every day, and the flow of information is sometimes haphazard, and that is a role that nonprofits can absolutely play as a trusted advisor to members of Congress and to other elected officials about what's happening in their community. So it's certainly a role to play with voters, and then to pivot after an election and to play that same role with lawmakers.
And I think, just to close the loop on that, I think nonprofits are in the middle of that because they're both trusted messengers with the communities they serve, but also when they're trying to advocate for issues that the communities they serve aren't voting, sometimes the doors get closed on them. I don't need to listen to you because your community doesn't vote. And so
that's a good point.
Bringing them and engaging them in the process, they increase their influence on those policies they care about.
That's a really good point. Patrice, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think our organization has done a lot on the information education front, both to members of Congress and to elected officials, but also to the electorate. So I'll give you a couple of examples of something that we've done this election cycle. We've spent a lot of time, both IWF RC3 and IWV RC4, on the issue of healthcare. And one of the things we like to do is correct misperceptions, because very often people are inundated with statistics and data, with messaging points from lots of different directions. And sometimes the electorate isn't sure exactly what to believe. And so two of the things that we really did, one was really interesting on correcting some misperceptions about price transparency in healthcare, is that we targeted over 3 million persuadable women this election cycle in about 8 different states. And we sent them mailers that talked about what's the issue with pre-existing conditions, what has happened with Medicaid expansion, what's going on with the Affordable Care Act, and in terms of the court, as well as what conservatives have done when it comes to healthcare. And presenting that information, I think, in an interesting way, in a quiz format, so that it's kind of testing your knowledge and challenging some of the perceptions that you've already thought about to see what's happened. We're still waiting to see back exactly how that direct mail campaign, educational campaign has worked. But also we on the IWV side, we also did a multi-channel digital advertising campaign where this is where the constituent engages their member of Congress or their representative, where it's we did a pledge, a patient protection pledge, asked individuals to have your member of Congress sign that pledge, and then afterwards you get we ask them to text those 3 million voters to text their representative for either, and thank them for signing the pledge or spank them for not signing it. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting way of using digital tech tools that are available, using smartphones and text messaging, and then also traditional mail. And so when we think about nonprofits' role in educating on different issues, you may come at it from a different perspective, but we're all speaking to a unique slice of the electorate, whatever the issue is, and trying to connect with them on the messages that are going to resonate. We're also pairing that with the messages that we're sharing to legislators to kind of get them all on the same page. So, it's really a fun way, but you can also measure some of the impact, because you can tell how many people have actually taken the actions. You can tell if your messaging is showing up in a speech, or if the member of Congress has actually taken that pledge and is abiding by that and bringing in some accountability, that your constituents can hold them accountable for their whatever future votes they take on different positions.
It's a great way to have some metrics around what you're doing is actually working, it's actually motivating voters and motivating the public, and then motivating members. So that's a terrific way to drive some metrics. Brian, a question from you from the audience, a practical question. In your experience, either this election or others, were there particular tools, particular strategies that you saw that really drove voter turnout?
You're speaking to that, I would say, face to face. I mean, it's basic, it's rudimentary, but face-to-face engagement with trusted messengers is by far the most effective strategy you can employ. It runs circles around online stuff. It runs circles around digital strategies. Face-to-face is what changes the game. And it's labor intensive. That's what's most effective.
I was going to say, in this case, you mean mask to mask voter engagement.
Exactly.
Catherine, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'd love to. We took our Get Out the Vote work broadly to encompass voter registration, issue education, and mobilization this year. We are a C3 only organization, so we are completely nonpartisan in the work that we do. And we really approach this on 2 levels. And that's what's different this year for us. We had 3 primary goals. The first was to lift up women's voices, to make sure that our priorities and concerns were heard during the election process. We particularly focused in on childcare, economic recovery, and racial justice issues, and used a national survey followed by some target state surveys in order to be able to lift those concerns up and educate folks in communities as well as policymakers. And we'll continue to pull those threads forward, that information forward, into our advocacy with the next Congress and administration. So we wanted to lift women's voices, concerns, and priorities up. We wanted to make sure that voters had accurate information election. Everything is so complicated and was so complicated this year with COVID. And so we wanted to be that trusted source. We've worked with a nonprofit vote for a number of years now, so we take that responsibility quite seriously. And then we really wanted to be able to mobilize people, not just have an idea, but get to the polls, follow through on that voting plan. And so every time there's an election, we are always about the business of creating resources and providing training to our local associations so that they can engage their communities. So we've got toolkits around, different hosting of events, social media engagement, just different kinds of toolkits that we provide to those local associations on the ground, because they're really the boots on the ground army to do this work. And this is the first time we've taken the additional step at the national level of having a year-long campaign, particularly in the year that also saw the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and some other key pieces of legislation that are about expanding democracy for women and people of color. We took those as opportunities to host events, awareness-raising events. We had an in-person one. We had planned all in-person before COVID. So we had a New Hampshire virtual town hall and presidential candidate forum in the very cold January months, maybe a week before the New Hampshire primary, which feels like 5 years ago. We had representation from 5 of the then probably 17 Democratic campaigns represented. The Republican campaign did not come to that event. And then we had to do a pivot. That was a big pivot very quickly. We did 2 events that were national in scope that didn't engage campaigns. And then in October, we did targeted virtual town halls and candidate forums in Florida, Arizona, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. We had done some targeted state polling of women so that we were able to say the women of North Carolina are concerned about X, Y, and Z, instead of just speaking from our pre-COVID national survey. And that was just a great way to make sure that in each of those states, which turned out to be, if you watched all through the week, Florida and Ohio certainly got decided election night, but there was a lot of interest in those 2 states, and 2 of the other 3 still haven't technically been called yet. So they were states that we considered to be bellwether places, that there would be a lot of the women's voice would be important, that there was a nonpartisan lane for us to occupy to lift up issues that we could validate and verify as issues of concern. We did polling that allowed us to oversample specific women of color groups. So not just women of color as a whole, but Black women, Latinas, API, Native American. We were able to slice and dice that by generations. So we had data that we could lift up looking at Gen Z, Gen X, millennials, and older voters. And we were also able to look at political parties so that we could see where there were common concerns across all of those different kinds of demographics. So that was really important to us as part of our strategy to be able to lift up what the women of a particular community or place were emphasizing or felt was a concern, a driving concern in this election. And those virtual town halls, and then we'd have the virtual town hall that was really a nonpartisan conversation. We would close that out, and then we created space for each of the presidential campaigns. And then where there was an active Senate race for the Senate campaigns to participate. And we had great participation across the board. There was only one event where the Republican presidential candidate surrogate at the last minute wasn't able to join us. So we had bipartisanship across 4 of the 5. And because we had invited that in that 5th one, we still allowed the Democratic surrogate to speak because it was the Republicans who we gave equal forum, I guess is what I want to emphasize, which is what we needed to do. And then we had, while in one state, the Senate campaigns chose not to engage with us, in the other state, they did engage. And in fact, the wife of one of the candidates came and spoke and participated. So we were really overall pleased with this strategy of engaging our local associations in doing the on-the-ground voter engagement, and us at the national level really doing messaging and engagement around big picture issues in partnership with our local associations.
What we know so well, Catherine, is that it's that state-specific or district-specific information about how the voters in their state or their district really feel on issues, that moves the ball.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sonia, did you want to jump in?
Yes. So our voter outreach and our civic engagement participation started like everyone else this year. We started with like very clear missions of what we were going to support as a foundation. Obviously, April, at the beginning of the year, census participation to support our partners on the ground. And then, of course, we were going to pivot quickly to do voter activation. Of course, we know what happened in March. And and we knew that we quickly had to move and get money on the ground because our partners, who many represent communities where broadband is not available, we knew that they needed the support on the ground as soon as possible. We only had 2 weeks before April 1st, which is the first day of the census day. So in a matter of 2 weeks, we were able to activate and put money on the ground to ensure that they had money to transition from the in-person events to go virtual. And for many of those organizations, it was very tough because in some communities, they had never used Zoom or any of the other tools. But of course, we all adjusted, we were resilient. And now one thing that I would say that one of the big lessons that we came from that experience, from that first round of grants, is that many of our partners on the ground have said that virtual organizing, it is not going to go away. This is how we're going to do things. It is just going to be another tool that will be used. Of course, it is not a one tool only. You cannot just do Zoom and think you're going to change the community's mind or activate it. But it is one thing that they learn quickly that this is a tool that is effective, is relatively inexpensive after you have the right equipment to be able to move and continue your outreach from this point on. So that was very exciting to hear that. Obviously, one thing that I would say that we learned as well is that you have to meet the partners where they're at. In some communities, of course, in the Rio Grande Valley, Lupe, that was a big issue, that it continues to be the digital divide, a big issue. But then you have an organization like Jolt in Houston, Texas, where their target audience is a younger Generation Z constituency. And for them, being able to move quickly and connect social justice issues to their voter outreach efforts, it was one thing that it has been something that has been dynamic for them. And I could go on with examples on the ground, but in our second round, of course, we knew those were some of the tools that we needed to adjust. And of course, in total, we were able to put on the ground $250,000 to 18 Latino-led organizations throughout the country and Puerto Rico. And with the three goals to build political power for Latinos. And obviously you cannot do that without knowing that it has to be done as a collective power with other coalitions of Latinos, Brown, Indigenous, LGBT, Asian Americans, coalitions that are doing this work on the ground. So it's been a very interesting experience in learning what worked for us in this political cycle.
That's fascinating, particularly how the digital divide, what managed to be narrowed in some cases, and that people found that it sounds like moving forward, virtual is going to be a good tool, not the only tool, but a good tool. Yeah. Wonderful. Brian, did you want to say any last words?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you, Sonia, for bringing up the digital divide issue, because I think that's one of the things that I think is important for us always to keep in mind. But I think, and one of the things that we've learned is that, digital strategies can be very, I should also add, we're also the managers of National Voter Registration Day, the big collaborative voter registration holiday. So we work with corporate partners, nonprofits, election officials, et cetera. And I've seen a lot of data come in, and online strategies can be very, very effective at engaging large numbers of people very inexpensively. But those large numbers of people tend to skew white. They tend to skew educated. They tend to skew, what it doesn't meet the demographic. It's a big number, but it's not a substitute for face-to-face, which I think is the point I was making earlier, is that when you're dealing with a community that's truly marginalized, there's no substitute for looking someone in the eye and talking to them and talking to them about their opinion matters. And usually for a community that's truly marginalized, a tweet is not going to move them to action. A Facebook post is not going to feel them less empowered or less disempowered. It does take face-to-face action, which is why, yes, we employ a lot of digital strategies where we can, but we also sent 20,000 face masks to groups all around the country that were doing in-person voter registration, hand sanitizers, whatever it takes, because, voter registration, voter engagement strategies are what I would call an essential service, even in the mode of COVID, even in the time of COVID. If we can run liquor stores and convenience stores in the midst of the pandemic, we can do face-to-face voter engagement, and it's that important.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. I think we're going to now switch over to a different question and continue the discussion. Sue, you want to jump in with the next question?
I would love to jump in, Sandra. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you this evening. I'd like to shift our focus, or continue our focus actually, on what we learned, although now we're going to start talking a little bit about issues. So we all know this was an election conducted during an unprecedented time in this nation, in this world, where we're collectively experiencing a pandemic. I commented in our last workshop, which was back in mid-June, that the election playbook was really being rewritten, and it was rewritten. So in the months leading up to the election, the general consensus was that we were experiencing a trifecta of crises. We had a health crisis, an economic crisis, and a racial justice crisis. And these would drive how voters would evaluate different candidates. Of course, all three of these crises are experienced very differently depending on your race, your ethnicity, age, geography, socioeconomic status, education, political leanings, ideology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Early post-election polls are suggesting that the handling of the COVID pandemic, for example, didn't influence voters as much as we anticipated it might have. So here's my question for you. What were the issues that most motivated people, either the people from your target constituencies or even more generally, to vote? How do you know this? And what do you take from that? So who would like to start that conversation? Catherine, jump on in.
I'd love to jump in. Love to jump in. We, from the survey work that we did, we very much knew heading in the same thing that you just mentioned, that there was this trifecta of issues, right? That COVID was illuminating longstanding health inequities in our nation, that it was also exacerbating those inequities, right? That about how healthcare is delivered, who has access to what they need, and actually which communities physically are experiencing, the harm of, in this case, COVID, more acutely than others, right? Through this interplay of economics and access to healthcare. So we knew that was going to be a big issue, and our survey work really verified that. The economic impact on women, right? This is a she session, not a recession, right? We actually just released a paper in very late September, and there are others who are coining this phrase as well. 2008, that was a he session. That was mainly men being impacted. This economic calamity is really impacting women far more than others. And we have seen since the start of the new school year, women who might have been able to hang in there through summer are finding that they are not able to continue. They've actually been pulled out of the workforce. We would argue pushed out of the workforce by circumstance, given the schooling responsibilities, the caretaking responsibilities they have. And while you might have been able to make it through the end of the school year and through the summer, once it was clear that this was not a crisis going away, many women have been just pushed further out. And when you look at the percentages of women who are breadwinners in their family, it is really no surprise that economics, being able to make ends meet, being concerned that they can't make ends meet, that they can't make rent, all of those concerns definitely rose to the top for women across the 5 states that we looked at. On the racial justice issues, right, another huge driving force in the last 8 months, in particular, driving force for much longer than that for many folks who have been engaged around racial justice and actually experiencing police violence for so long. But it certainly tapped the national consciousness in a very new way, and I definitely agree, is a driver of things this year. What we found in our surveys in these 5 bellwether states is that for Black women in particular, and to a certain extent Latinas as well, there were incredibly high concerns about keeping their families safe from police violence, concerns about being the target of hate crimes. And that's where Latinas also joined with Black women in expressing those concerns in some of those states. For Latinas as well, concerns about immigration crisis and whether they were welcome in this country was another concern. So when you look across all women from the 5-state analysis that we did available on our website, I'll type in that. I'd be happy to share that with folks as well. You'll see that for women overall, access to affordable health care and being able to make ends meet financially were driving concerns, right? But when you break it down and look at white women, Black women, Latinas in particular, you find some nuance where women of color are have heightened concerns about racial justice. And in fact, when you look at white women and women overall as well in comparison, it's not that the other women don't share those concerns. It's just it's a greater intensity of concern to make it their top 1 and 2 for Black women. And in the case of Latinas, in some of those states around immigration and acts of hate and violence being directed against them. And then we also polled around legislative priorities, right? What were their priorities across these demographic groups for the next Congress and presidential administration? Here again, we saw that economic and healthcare theme pull forward. Healthcare was at the top of the list. All 3 of the separate items that we tested in this survey and these surveys around healthcare topped the list for women overall. And there was still heightened level of concern around economics, things like equal pay, creating workplaces that were free, safe workplaces free from sexual violence, discrimination, and harassment was up there as well for women in our economic bucket. And then in the racial justice bucket, in terms of the items that we tested, even though the intensity level for white women and women overall was lower than for specific women of color groups and lower than the other items, you still had 66–70% of women in each of the demographic groups saying that Congress taking action to end racial profiling, to hold police accountable, those kinds of legislative actions were still very important to them. So overall, I think that our survey data validates that assumption that even if exit polls don't show that the COVID response drove votes, these were driving concerns for women across multiple different demographics and states that were very much in play and have been in play for a long time. And the last 8 months have really illuminated them and exacerbated them.
Thanks so much, Catherine, because I think that really illustrates one of the points I know that I teach in the class, and one of the points we know in the nonprofit sector is really such an incredibly effective and important role that the nonprofit sector can play, staying within all the rules and lines it has to stay in, is educating. educating the electorate, but also educating the candidates around what are driving issues for particular demographics. So thanks for sharing that detail. Who else would like to jump in? Patrice, I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, actually, I just unmuted Sue.
Perfect.
I think Catherine's, survey data is really interesting, and I think certainly aligns well with what we've heard from our members and our supporters. Largely anecdotally, we haven't done any specific survey data, but we have looked at exit polling, which may or may not be accurate. But we do know, at least going into the election cycle, the economy was a number one issue and was a leading issue, particularly for women and particularly for independent women, which is that group of women that we at the Independent Women's Forum and Voice, we tend to speak to. And I think Catherine kind of touched on some of those issues, but I'm going to come at them from a slightly different perspective. Anecdotally, from emails, from correspondence with our members, many of them heard or many of them articulated to us that when it comes to the economy, they're thinking about the economy pre-COVID-19. So at the beginning of this year, first couple of months of this year, we were projecting that 2020 was going to be an economically robust year. The economy was quite strong, historically low unemployment rates for men and women, for minorities of every demographic group, high labor participation rates for women, to the point where I think women surpassed men in terms of full-time working in the economy. So we're starting at a very strong place, and a lot of women today who either have not really been impacted by COVID from a workplace perspective, in that they're able to work from home, for example, or maybe their spouse is able to work from home, they're thinking, well, I want to see the economy get back to that point. I want to see the economy get back to a place where unemployment again is falling back to those low levels, where poverty rates are hitting low levels. 2019, I think, were historic low poverty levels for pretty much every racial demographic, which is really interesting. Now I'm going to pair that with some of the analysis that I've seen elsewhere around different minority groups, Hispanic men and Hispanic women who where President or the Republican candidate outperformed from 2016 was driven again by the economy, more so much people wanting to get back to the place where their business can be restarted, where the idea of shutting down an economy because of COVID-19 is not what they wanted to see. They're looking more for, being able to reopen, send kids to school, get their businesses back, get people back to kind of a normalcy. And so when we look at from a nonprofit perspective, when talking to groups and when talking to these different individuals and demographics, we're asking them, okay, so what do you think is the right policy solution? What is the way to get there? And those are some of the things that they've articulated to us, which is why I'm not surprised that the economy was a number one issue for so many women, independent women. And how they voted, that's another story. Surprisingly, there are folks who you may have expected them to vote one way and they didn't. They voted a very different way because for them, the economy was number one. Number two was healthcare. And I think that's why we spent so much time at IWF and IWV looking at a different way of communicating on healthcare, because consistently women who make so many of the healthcare decisions in their households, because maybe they're primary breadwinners or because they're making all the spending decisions, they're thinking about the costs of healthcare. And so it's less about one major healthcare policy decision or another, as much as how do I reduce my how much I spend on medication when I go to the pharmacy, or how can I find out about the cost of certain procedures that I need to take in advance. And so issues like price transparency tended to rate really high with us early in the year when we kind of talked to different members, which is why we did that campaign I was mentioning earlier around price transparency, educating on it, getting constituents to hold their members accountable if they took our pledge or not. So when you dig down into healthcare, I think it's the price of healthcare, the cost to everyday households, and particularly women who are making those decisions, was really important. I have also seen about racial issues, equity, diversity, policing, all of that show up. But I think for a lot of independent women, the economy, particularly getting it back to that strong place that it was at the beginning of the year, and healthcare and the price and costs of healthcare were really two driving issues. So I think it harkens some of what Catherine said, but I think brings from a kind of a conservative right-leaning perspective what folks who we speak to, how they were approaching it.
Very, very interesting, Patrice, and this fascinating idea of perspective, right? What lens are we looking at the issues through, and how we define them? And oftentimes we're probably talking about very, very similar issues, just expressed a bit differently. Sonia, would you like to jump in here?
Yes, I would completely echo the comments made by Catherine and Patrice. But I would also say, and staying in my C3 lane, that it's been no secret that the current administration has negatively impacted Latinos. From day one, they were singled out as rapists and criminals. Obviously, very harmful policies were also passed, obviously family separation, among other things, and they experienced a downfall in the economy with high unemployment, and they have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. So I think while the polls didn't maybe do not reflect that, I think the motivation for many communities, not just Latinos, but many marginalized communities of color, their motivation to vote has started from day one, from 4 years ago. So I would say that anecdotally, many people have said how in some ways Donald Trump has been the biggest motivator to get people out to register and to vote. So
Thank you very much, Sonia. Really interesting. Brian, did you want to jump in on this one?
Sure, I'll jump in, and you know, the original question was what policies, I understand, motivated people to get out to vote. And I think, you know, from our perspective, because we're an intermediary, right? We're a resource organization for a wide range of nonprofits. So when it comes to the policies, they vary significantly. Again, a lot of our partners are very focused on racial justice issues. Others are focused on hunger. Others are focused on housing or the arts or, you know, education, whatever. And so I think at the policy level, the issues do vary of what motivates people to get out to vote. But I would say, while there's policies that motivate, there's also policies that enable people to vote. And in that case, I'm going to make basically policies that make it easier and possible for people to vote. And in that sense, I think I would lift up the vote by mail. You know, the dramatic expansion of mail-in voting that we saw this year amidst the pandemic. It was initially rolled out as a measure to reduce COVID, to prevent COVID. But it also made it far easier for a lot of people to vote that might have otherwise been hesitant to, for public health reasons. We've done studies about policies like mail-in voting, but also policies like same-day registration, automatic voter registration, that these policies do actually contribute to higher voter turnout. And I think what we're going to see with the mail-in voting policy is it did have an impact on turnout this election. I mean, we're looking at a 120-year record in voter turnout now. Only a part of that's due to the policy. A lot of that's due to the motivational factors of what we're getting people to fired up amidst the pandemic. But I think we're going to see lasting effects of that policy shift when we get into 2021 and beyond, because the biggest boost that mail-in voting has is actually on off-cycle elections, local elections where you're not being inundated by every media channel that, hey, there's an election next week. Hey, there's an election in 3 days. Hey, there's an election tomorrow. You know, a lot of local elections, you may not know there's an election even happening unless you get that ballot in the mail. Oh, there's an election. My city council is voting. And when we see local elections, we see a huge boost in turnout when it's coupled with mail-in voting. And there's been a lot of studies to show that. So you know, again, I think there's policies that motivate people to vote, and then there's policies that enable people to vote. And they're both important drivers in that turnout equation.
Brian, that's a really fascinating perspective. And it's almost like you were looking at my notes to tee up the next question, because that basically was going to be part of my next question and still will be. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. We're going to shift our focus now a little bit again, and we're looking at the next election cycle. So as is always said in our business, you know, the day after election day is the beginning of the next cycle, right? So we're always thinking, what have we learned? would have learned ahead. So there's just a couple of observations that I want to make that may give you some ideas. As volatile as the presidential elections seem to be, many other races in the country were either status quo in the turnout, but in the result, or in some cases could be seen as kind of resets. Many of the House seats gained by Republicans, for example, were gained back from relatively recent swings. Of the 15 or 16 House races that have still yet to be called, the vast majority of those are leaning red. And this, of course, has considerably tightened the Democrats' majority in the House. Now, our conversations in this evening have focused primarily on the federal level elections, but this was really played out at the state level as well. In fact, there was only one state, all the states who had elections, where there was a flip in party control. That was New Hampshire. And New Hampshire is notorious for flipping control. They've done so several times in the past decade. Now, one last observation goes exactly to what Brian was talking about, which is the way in which we vote. Now, by necessity this year, record number of voters cast their ballots by mail, absentee or early voting. So this leads me to wonder if the high volumes of people not voting in person on election day will continue. So those are a few things for you to consider. And I'm going to pose the question, and I'm also going to weave in a couple of questions that came from our audience so that we can use our time efficiently. So just basically, as you look forward to the 2022 mid-year elections and begin to evaluate engagement strategies for those races, what might be one or two takeaways? And then Brian, there was a direct question to you. How do you measure the success of voter turnout? And how might you layer that back in? And Sonia, there was a question directed to you about outreach to Latino voters. How can philanthropy scale its investment efforts to match the massive number of Latino voters? So in other words, taking the lessons learned and then start to scale up. So I am going to start with, anybody want to raise their hand? Catherine, jump in.
Sure. I'd be happy to take those lessons learned from this year. For us at the national level, we learned a lot. Like I mentioned at the beginning, that we've always done this kind of training and resources, meaning informational resources, toolkits to our local associations, and then left them to their devices to do what they were able to. And this year we took on a different role, partnering with YWCAs in these 5 states, right? Assuming what I know to be true from other work I've done, that if you don't pay for it or staff it, it ain't getting done, right? And because we didn't have financial resources to pass on to buy out time of a staff member at the local level to plan and organize a national virtual town hall or a state level town hall, we ended up at the national level rolling up our sleeves and doing that work. We did try to organize with some allied organizations, some phone banking opportunities, and 1 or 2 other things, some mailers, stuff like that, things we were trying to do to make it easy on our local associations to engage. And so we relearned a lot about that local national partnership for our nonprofit sector, for our nonprofit network. There still has to be, even when we are putting on the table that we'll do the heavy lift of organizing something, there's still a lot that's needed from our local associations because they've built the relationships at the local level. Some of them needed kind of a heightened level of staffing than others, and it was really a challenge. And so I think one of the things we learned, given our current capacity and their struggle with just keeping the doors open and services running because of COVID, right? Remember, they're running domestic violence shelters. They're running childcare programs. They're providing health screenings and mammograms. They're doing all kinds of things at the local level that were directly impacted their staff's ability to come in, whether they could keep their doors open, whether they could hold their fundraisers. And so sometimes it's not enough for the national group to say, hey, we're going to staff this for you. There still needs to be some capacity at that local level. So we learned just a lot about how to support our local associations and what works if we can't just give them money to hire somebody to execute something. And I think that the second thing that we learned a lot about was just we went in with some ideas about what issues were top of mind, the ones that you mentioned, and queuing up a question, and really found through those surveys that we knew that from our 2018 survey, even after COVID hit, we found in those 5 states these economic healthcare concerns that were increased because of COVID, and continuing racial justice concerns that were particularly acute for women of color. And those are findings that we will continue to pull forward in our transition team advocacy when we go to the Hill with our new set of legislative priorities in the coming year. We learned that we had some good spidey sense, as it were, if you know, Spider-Man reference, a good spidey tingly sense about what issues were important to our network and then to the communities that they served. And we'll be able to continue to use that data, that information. That was kind of a good investment on our end to be able to continue to support our agenda moving forward.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And I think one of the points you raised, which I often see is such a necessity at the national level, I too am at a national organization, is basically to have the humility to learn from the locals, right? Is when you get on the ground, you are incredibly humbled by the work. And so I love that you raised that and that you're bringing that forward. Patrice, would you like to jump on in?
Yeah, sure, Sue. I think I had two thoughts came to my mind around one strategy and one tactics when it comes what we've learned and what we're going to be carrying forward. I think from a strategic standpoint, we found that it's critical to find misperceptions when informing voters, when trying to be that trusted partner in providing information, understanding, what are the high voter interest issues that really motivates them, and understanding what are the misperceptions they may have about a particular issue, and then trying to correct that misperception. And from a tactical standpoint, I think that's what we found at IWF as being our sweet spot on sundry issues. And from a tactical standpoint, we have actually found that quizzes are very effective in doing that and correcting misperceptions, challenging people on their own thinking about issues. And then really, it's interesting, once you actually don't have to tell people, if you provide the information in an engaging way, they actually they change their viewpoint and actually end in the place you want them to end in, which is kind of the right position. So giving them as much knowledge as possible. So I think from just kind of a strategic and a tactical standpoint, that's how we're going to be approaching a lot of our issue advocacy on different issues. I mean, it's just going to depend. In terms of, we didn't do GOTV or anything like that. We didn't do voter registration. But I think when we're a national organization, and so we're trying to reach as many people as possible through these different avenues. Like I talked about direct mail, I talked about social media and online engagement. But you really have to be able to make an issue that's interesting and hot button for someone also personal. And we have some interesting storytelling campaigns that we've also found being very effective, weaving in those personal stories so that then you lead with the personal story. You change the perception using the quiz or whatever tactical tactic that you find is effective, and then you can get that person to where you want them to go, which may be to do that, contact your member about a particular issue, hold them accountable, slap them on the wrist when they're wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's fascinating, Patrice, the way that a lot of these lessons we learn are so transferable in the work, and great to carry those forward. Brian, I'm going to go to you then, Sonia, and I know you each had kind of more directed questions, so why don't you jump in on those?
Sure, and speaking to the lessons learned, and I think one of those questions was, how do you measure success?
Right.
And that it ties in with the lessons learned. And I'm going to actually post something in the chat box here for everyone to see. It's a report that we do every couple of years called the Engaging New Voters Report. And it's a field report that we do looking at the impact of nonprofits that engage the communities they serve in voting elections, right? So we partner with 200 or so nonprofits across several states that are doing voter registration work or get out to voter pledge to vote work. And so as part of this, they collect all the contact information from everyone that they engage, right? And by having that contact information, we can then match it to the voter files a few months later, once the voter files are updated, and say, okay, those people that we engaged, how did they vote? What was the likelihood of voting compared to comparable voters, demographically similar comparable voters? And what the report shows is, not surprising, that obviously the engagement of nonprofits as trusted messengers, whether it's a food pantry, whether it's a health center, whether it's a women's crisis center, they have a very positive impact on turnout. We documented an 11 percentage point advantage in turnout for the communities that are engaged by nonprofits as compared to comparable communities. So yes, we can measure the impact, and yes, it's very positive. So the three ways I would say we measure the impact, one of which is are we having an impact on turnout? Absolutely yes, and the report's documented. The second way we measure impact is the way a lot of us, how many people did you engage? So, nonprofits will track how many people did we register? How many people did we, do phone calls to? But the third, and I think very important metric to that, is who did we engage? And I think that gets down to the equity lens. Are we perpetuating inequities in the system, or are we reconciling, counteracting inequities in the system? And, we know that the nonprofits that we worked with were twice as likely to engage young people, twice as likely to engage low-income communities, twice as likely to engage communities of color than the registered voters overall in the same communities. So by working through nonprofits, we're able to document the number of people they register, who they're registering, and they're registering the right people, and that they're having a positive impact on turnout. It's still early to do that analysis for this year. We are going to be coming out with the analysis that I posted is from our 2018 cycle, but sometime in mid 2021, we'll have an analysis of all the data that we collected in this cycle, and we'll have those kind of lessons learned. That said, there are some things that we've already learned just from the debriefing that we've done with a lot of the partners. And this goes back to, I echoed this earlier, in person is still where it's at. And what we saw is the groups that tried to pivot to doing all digital strategies or exclusively digital strategies, at least within our 200 group focus study, generally underperformed. The groups that continued to do face-to-face engagement, a lot of nonprofits never stop doing face-to-face engagement. You're a food pantry, you still got to deliver food. You can't do that on the internet, so they're delivering food baskets to people there. People are driving up and getting services. They were integrating voter engagement, and those groups meet or beat their goals. And so I think some of the early indications is that it's still where it's at, and we have to figure out ways to do it in a safe way. And the third thing that I would say, and this is a lesson learned, and I think this goes back to the point I started this thing with, which is, the goal of political campaigns is not to foster an inclusive electorate. The goal of political campaigns is to win elections, right? But what we saw this year is we saw record numbers of groups that voter engagement has nothing to do with their mission at all, yet they were doing it. On the National Voter Registration Day side, we saw huge numbers of corporate partners stepping up to the plate. Allstate Insurance doing voter engagement with all their 40,000 employees. Walmart was running National Voter Registration Day promotions in all their stores on the screens and over the PA systems. Levi's was running voter engagement promos. And in the nonprofit side, of course, the YMCAs, the YWCAs, Feeding America did a huge program. So a lot of nonprofits recognize that this isn't something we leave to the parties. This isn't something we leave to the candidates. Voter engagement is something, if done nonpartisan, that all of us have a responsibility and a role of doing to help foster an inclusive electorate. And I think in part, obviously there's a lot of things that contributed, but the fact that so many people came out of the woodwork to engage the communities they serve, from the corporate sector to the nonprofit sector and beyond, helped contribute to that 120-year record we saw in voter turnout this year.
Yeah, Brian, I think you raised a couple interesting points. One, when measuring on the numbers, it's not the numbers, it's the crosstabs, right? We got to understand what the numbers tell us. And also, there does seem to be a rise in interest and commitment to civic engagement, which I think is fascinating. It's an area I love personally, and you're absolutely right. We couldn't escape reminders to get out to vote, which is great. So I'm going to go to Sonia to round out this set of questions.
If I was to put the headline in my head of this election cycle, is that there is no such thing as a single Latino voting bloc. It was defined by the media, by all of us. We're guilty. We cannot say that anymore. In the same way that we wouldn't define the European American voting bloc. We wouldn't do that. With 32 eligible Latino voters across the country, we have grown in numbers, and our political ideology is defined by our age, our socioeconomic status, religion, where we live, and our country of origin or our heritage. So I would say that I understand, and Brian, when you said that the job of political operatives is not to really reach out to all of the different voters, but I would challenge them that if they want to court Latinos across the country, and they have to invest and use more sophisticated data in order for them to be able to court Latinos depending on the region that they're looking to run different races. I just, that is something that there is no going around from this point on. As far as a philanthropic organization, there are a lot of lessons still to be learned. I completely agree with what you said, Brian, that in-person, personal interaction, it is still the best way to interact with and activate civic engagement in different communities. Absolutely. And we are working, and we will be looking at different areas where we see emerging Latino communities where you saw some surprises. I think Omaha was a great example of how Black and Brown communities really made a difference in a state where it was unexpected to bring an electoral vote. But bottom line, I would say that one of the biggest lessons that we take from this is that none of this will happen, and political power will not be done unless we work in power building with our Black, Brown, Asian Americans, Indigenous, and LGBT brothers and sisters. So that would be one thing that it has to be a priority.
Thank you so much, Sonia. It's great words to close out on. And let me just add, for the person who asked how to scale with philanthropic investments, I'd say call Sonia and get some philanthropic investments going her way. So I'm going to turn to Sandra, who's going to take us through a lightning round. I want to to alert our panelists that we're going to have quick answers here, because we do have several questions left, and we only have about 18 minutes left. So Sandra, off to you.
Great. So the election really isn't over, right? Because we have a runoff in Georgia, and that is going to determine the outcome of who controls the Senate. So while the bulk of the election is over, we still have this one little piece. Quick question. Are any of your organizations engaging in Georgia, and if so, how?
Yeah, I'd say YWCA definitely is. I was on the phone each of the last 2 days with YWCA of Greater Atlanta. We offered a range of opportunities that we could support, and they really highly respect the work that's already being done on the ground as organizers, and they have not been engaged in that as much. And so we're not going to try to step on those toes. That work's going to continue forward, but we will be convening on December 15th, a Why Women Vote virtual town hall and candidate forum. And I went to college in Georgia and worked there for a year, like much of the South, where I come from, and candidly, other states as well. The last thing that they need is a bunch of outsiders coming in and saying what should be done. And so in that town hall, we'll be lifting up Georgia women's voices so that there is a Georgia conversation in order to do some of what we've been doing all along in terms of really centering equity issues. And we'll be doing addressing economic security, childcare, and racial justice concerns of the women, that women within the state of Georgia bring forward, and hopefully getting engagement from both of the two runoff races down in Georgia.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to jump in? Sonia.
I would, one of our community partners, the Latino Community Fund in Georgia, we are working hand in hand in the way that we could support them as they move forward with this recount.
Great, great. Brian.
Yeah. Again, we're mostly an intermediary, so we're resourcing groups that are based in Georgia that are doing that kind of work. We're doing some. One of the things that we did do is we turned on this is going to sound really wonky, but there's a digital. A lot of folks, again, one of the challenges with online voter registration is that even if you have, and there is a new voter registration deadline, and I think it's December. It's early mid-December.
December 7th, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for the Georgia elections. Online voter registration works if you have a current driver's license, because you have to have a driver's license in order to use an online registration portal, because they do signature matching.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an arbitrary thing. The reason they do that is because that's where they have to have a signature for your voter registration, and they pull it from the DMV by having your driver's license. So what that means is that people who don't have a driver's license can't use the online voter registration portal, or to the extent that they can, they have to download a PDF, then they have to find a printer, and a lot of times they don't have a printer, they have to find a stamp, they may not have a stamp. So one of the things we turned on is we turned on our print to mail tool on our voter registration site, which basically the person can fill out the voter registration, and when they get to the last button, if they don't have a driver's license, they can press a button that says, please print and mail me a pre-populated form with a stamp on it. It's one of those adaptations that is important if you're really going to look at equity when you look at tools like online voter registration. How do you make sure online voter registration doesn't exclude a certain segment of the population?
Mm-hmm.
This is particularly important. This doesn't have to do with Texas, but in states like Texas where there is no online voter registration, everyone has to download a PDF, which means whole sections of the population that don't have printers can't do it. And so I think, and that's one of the things we're making available to our to our Georgia partners, excuse me, in the run up to that election cycle.
Yeah, and particularly now that we're at home or in a business setting, which necessarily is, challenged with COVID, a lot of these things we take for granted are unavailable. Something else that's another issue that's timely that I'd love input on is transition. Right, every new administration has a transition team that they put into place, and the Biden administration, incoming Biden administration, is similarly. All the news for the past couple of days has been what that transition team looks like, what they're working on. That they're looking for, going back to the very beginning, trusted voices. Interested to hear what your organizations are doing. Or want to be doing with this new transition team, and any tips you can offer to anyone listening.
For us at YWCA, yes, very interested. We are, putting together our policy and legislative priorities. I think I mentioned that at some point during one of my comments earlier. And we'll be putting a letter together to the transition team to make sure that the administration is aware of what we think of as early priorities, executive orders that could be reversed in very short order, or new executive orders that could be put forward, as well as our longer term legislative agenda and policy priorities. So we'll be doing that. We are part of a lot of different coalitions of women's advocacy organizations, as well as civil rights organizations. So we're at the table for those meetings where some coalition transition letters get developed and go out, and where actually, when those principals and kind of senior level staff like myself come together, transition team is actually reaching out to try to meet with those groups to be able to give some more indication of how they want to bring in feedback, and we're able to have kind of that at least meeting space in order to share what's important to us, and why it's important to us. And for us as a network, we take an approach that I describe as program informed policy. We're not going to advocate on an issue that we can't speak to from the ground level, right? That isn't informed by what our local associations do on the ground. Actually, it's not that we won't. Sometimes we do. But if it's mission focused, even if we don't offer a program in it, but our strength is in being able to speak from what's happening on the ground. And we're going to take that same approach into communicating with the administration. And we were prepared, candidly, we did that with the Trump administration when they came in 2016, after the 2016 election. Even if Trump had won this election, it was the same strategy of sharing what our priorities are, trying to get the meetings in order to say, hey, this is really important to us. And even to the point of who our consultant lobbyists are that we bring on board is informed by what administration is in place. So we'll be taking a look at that as well.
Thank you, Patrice.
Yeah, well, we have had a very extraordinarily close, good relationship with the current administration, and we've been able to provide a lot of policy input on everything from price transparency in healthcare to paid leave policies that we've seen turned into legislation introduced in the House and Senate over the past 4 years. So right now, potentially new administration, we're now thinking through what are the bipartisan areas that we've worked on where we feel like there could be some potential alignment with the next administration, and of course with our partners, particularly those in the Senate. We've touched a little bit on criminal justice reform, particularly some of those policies that are helpful to women. And women who are serving time, as well as ensuring that someone who has served their time is able to be reintegrated into society, so reducing recidivism. And so I think that's probably one of those areas. But I think when it comes to just the process of it, it's sitting down with our entire issue set, looking at all the policy guides, the messaging documents that we put together, particularly for lawmakers on the Hill, and then thinking through, okay, what makes sense, what is reasonable in this policy, in this political climate, what is possible, and then trying to figure out where our allies continue to be on that. I mean, I do think it's going to be different being on the defensive compared to being on the offensive over the past 4 years. But what's great for nonprofits to realize is that your opponent on one issue could very well be your ally on another issue. And I think that to be some of our core issues, but some of our kind of secondary and tertiary issues, particularly around criminal justice reform that we've seen pass. So it's going through, thinking through the partnerships, thinking through the policies and the messaging points. And I think one of our strengths as an organization is our ability to speak to women and to speak to those center right, maybe a little bit center left women, and using the kind of messaging, helping lawmakers use the right kind of messaging. So that's going to be true for any administration and any iteration of Congress.
Yeah, Patrice, you raise a really good point, which is that on any issue, finding common ground, creating coalitions of strange bedfellows is going to get you far further, notwithstanding which administration or which parties in control of Congress. It's navigating what's in front of you, and that is what most nonprofits are so very good at, is navigating the landscape. And it appears that we may be in for divided government, in which case there's going to be a lot more navigating and reaching across the aisle to get issues and policies done. So wonderful. Does anybody else have any other comments before we go to wrap up? Any questions from the audience, Sue?
I'm just gonna, this will be a true lightning round because we have very little time left, but we did have a question on, and we've answered some of this, the role of technology in revolutionizing the electoral process. And I just want to add, you might want to answer this other one, which is whether some of the polling Basically, this question is saying, did it undermine our faith in the system, especially if you question the legitimacy of the polling? And does that actually have a kind of an effect on how the electorate views our election process? So choose one or the other of those with maybe a 1-minute response.
I think that the polling stuff is definitely going to impact how regular folks view. I think there's a lot of regular folks who actually don't pay attention to polls. And so maybe, you know, for a huge swath, maybe it has no impact. I think that for others who maybe tune into the news a little bit more and they see a disconnect, it'll have some impact. And as an organization, you know, we've got precious limited nonprofit dollars, some of which are dues from local associations doing, you know, domestic violence work and childcare and all these things. They could use those resources on the ground and need them desperately. So when they are a part of a network and paying dues in order to be represented well, we have to be incredibly vigilant stewards of those dollars. And so we will certainly be taking a look at how we've invested in surveys and polls to make sure that we feel confident that that's a good investment for us to be making as an organization. So I'd say, yeah, we need to look in the mirror, we need to look at the results and evaluate really carefully, knowing that it's not going to impact every voter, but there'll be a slice of folks who are impacted by it. That's my gut reaction to the question.
Anybody else? A quick 1-minute response?
Sure, I'll speak to the technology revolution question and say, I mean, I've already spoken about like sort of the limits of technology on one hand. I do think there's a lot of huge benefits that technology can have in terms of voter research. You know, there's a lot of tools for finding polling location, for finding who's on the ballot, what ballot measures are on, SMS text messaging campaigns where the person can get, hey, there's an election coming up, find out what's on the ballot. Here you click a button and you see what's on the ballot. So it can be very powerful from a voter education standpoint by putting vast amounts of resources in people's hands that are targeted to them. I think where it's going to fall short is some people's idea that somehow the act of voting is going to be digital. And I think we're years away from that, and probably for good reason, because paper is still where it's at from an election security standpoint. The reason states expanded mail-in voting is because you can't, with one click of you can't hack a paper election. It's the same reason people do paper trails at ballot locations. You know, it's far more secure from an election security standpoint. If you think of like, if you're concerned about like Soviet hacking or something like that, theoretically, if all our votes were cast digitally, yes, someone could, with a good line of code, change thousands of votes with one keystroke. You know, to change thousands of paper votes, you would have to basically break into a whole bunch of mailboxes. It just doesn't happen, which is why our elections are so much more secure the way they're built now. And I think
it's a really fascinating point, Brian.
Technology, there's places where technology is not working, and election security is one of the places where we still need paper. We need paper trails. Mm-hmm. We need to rely on paper. It's far more secure.
Very, very interesting point.
Sue, just
Patrice, yes, of course, Patrice, jump on it.
Quick thought on the technology piece. I think when it comes to the role of technology in elevating voices, we've seen small organizations, candidates, individuals be able to gain a huge platform of supporters, getting out their message, educating on issues. I think, unfortunately, what we've seen and bleeding over into regulations, which I'm sure is another topic for another night, but I think there is the question of how much tech companies have a role in censorship, in content moderation, and how that impacts elections. And both sides of the aisle are making the case for either greater content moderation by technology companies for the sake of saving our democracy and saving elections. The other side will say the very same thing. And I think it's one of those conversations that nonprofits come in because sometimes they're called in to be the referee, and sometimes their very voices are suppressed. So I think that's one of those issues that's going to be going into 2022 and 2024 around who is deciding, what information gets out, what is considered trusted, and the role that technology companies are playing in that.
That also fascinating, Patrice, and you're absolutely right. Probably a subject for an entire workshop. So we'll put that idea in the heads of the folks at Columbia. Sonia, did you want to make one quick comment?
Yes. So on the influence of polls, I would say that a lot of the, unfortunately, the nonprofits will, the responsibility of reassuring voters of a legitimate election, and that the polls obviously may want to influence you in some way. It's going to fall on the nonprofits who, like at the beginning of the election, we knew that it was going to be long, and many of us came together to ensure that we would issue statements saying that every vote should be counted, and that that elections, you know, have to be fair. So in the same way that it happened last week, the nonprofits may have to step in and provide that reassurance, and as the trusted source that obviously for upcoming elections, and you know, to follow polls to a certain extent.
That is a really great point. And we do know from research that's been done, I know independent sector has a lot of research on this, that nonprofits are incredibly trusted. And with that comes a responsibility. And Sonia, that was a great way to begin to wrap up this workshop. Sandra, was there anything you wanted to say in closing?
I just want to say thank you to this great panel. We've gotten tremendous feedback, and it's been a wide-ranging conversation. So thank you for being here.
And I would like to echo Sandra's thank you to this wonderful panel. Catherine, Sonia, Brian, Patrice, thank you so much for taking time in what has been an exhausting past several weeks and continues forward, but we so appreciate you being with us. Thank you to Cindy Lott and the team at Columbia University's nonprofit management program, including Frances Leviscount and Liz Picard, for helping us with this great series on nonprofits and elections. Our final installment in this 6-part series is entitled Nonprofit Policy and Advocacy in Action, The Path Ahead. That's going to take place on February 11th, 2021. And registration should open a few weeks before that workshop, so please keep an eye out for notifications. All of our workshops are recorded, and the links can be found at Columbia University's School of Professional Studies nonprofit management site under events. So finally, Sandra and I want to thank all of you who turned out this evening. We hope to see you at our February workshop. Until then, and I can't believe that we're nearing the time of year when we can say this, but we want to wish all of you a safe, healthy, and happy holiday season. And with that, we'll see you in the new year. Thanks to all of you, and good evening.
Bye, take care.